Hi everyone, I hope you can hear me. Thank you to everyone for attending our fourth talk of the Neurodiversity and Disability Equality event. Today we have Vivian, who will provide a talk on ADHD, race and non-binary intersectionality in higher education. She will describe how ADHD women and non-binary people can be presented in different ways and how someone's race has a role to play in misdiagnosis of ADHD, but most importantly, the intersectionality of the three and that there is not one way to define ADHD. Consequently, how ADHD and intersectionality can go unnoticed in academia. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Vivian.
Cool, thank you. So hey everyone, thanks for coming along on a 6 p.m. in winter. Really appreciate it. So let me share my screen. Right. Move this. Cool. So, right, you can see it, right? Yeah. Yeah, okay, cool. Alrighty. So yeah, feel free to cool. Hey, I see people in the chat. Yeah, feel free to ask questions as I go along. Because it's actually kind of easier for me. Because I'll remember like what you're asking about. If you like ask me at the end, I might have to like look back. But yeah, as an introduction, hey, I'm Vivian. At the moment, I'm a trainee clinical associate in psychology studying at UCL. I'm the founder and director of ADHD Babes, which is a support group for Black women and Black non-binary people who identify with ADHD. I'm also a creative workshop facilitator, specifically combining performing arts and Black British history. I'm a performing artist. I'm a mother of now 4 plants, so I need to update this. And I'm also an anime lover. Yeah, just so you get an idea of who I am. Cool. So, go to the next page. Okay, yeah. So ADHD and me. So this, just a quick intro into like how I learned about having ADHD, just to yeah, give like a wider context. So this is me in Sri Lanka on a boat holding a monkey type animal. And this was like the beginning of my journey in understanding my relationship with ADHD. So after I graduated from university, I did a 3-month placement in Sri Lanka. I was working with local communities, working in the National Mental Health Institute. And during that period, there was a lot of kind of emotional difficulties that I was struggling with. I really loved being out there. Like, it was a beautiful country, beautiful people. But in terms of how I was managing my emotions, in terms of like the lack of structure, the change, processing those different things, like I was just having a really difficult time. And there was just something screaming like something's wrong, something's not 100% right. So when I got back, I started working part-time for the National Autistic Society. And there was a lot of things that I saw in our training where I was like, oh, this sounds really familiar, like struggling with changes in routine, rigidity of thinking, sensitivity to sensory overload. So I was like, okay, maybe I've got undiagnosed autism. So I kind of wrote a list of all those things, took it to my GP, and they referred me on to the autism clinic. So I did the assessment. They said, no, you do not have that. But the psychologist was really, really attentive and noticed that I scored really highly in terms of symptoms for ADHD. So they referred me onto the ADHD clinic, had a 3-hour assessment. Yeah. And they turned around and said, I've got ADHD. So just as a quick breakdown, there's 3 types of ADHD. Inattentive type, which often people might be forgetful, procrastinate, find it hard to sustain attention. Then you've got predominantly hyperactive, where it might be, again, difficulty to pay attention, but because there's a lot of focus on different things, feeling like, you're always on a motor. If it's not physical, it's like mentally, brain is always ticking. And then you've got combined type. Does anyone want to guess which one I have? You can put it in the chat or say it out loud. The prize is like an inner prize of achievement. got combined. That's the second one. Oh, lots of combined. Oh, second, okay, cool. Second, what's the second one again? Hyperactive, yeah. First one. Okay, a bit of a mix. So everyone who said combined first was correct. I got the best of both worlds, a little bit of both, which I was really surprised by, because my idea of ADHD was literally, you know, a young white boy running around a classroom. Yeah, Dustin wins the prize because they were first. Yeah, so I was really, really surprised. So my next question is, what do you think my response was to finding out? You can put it in the chat or say it out loud. Relief, yeah, that makes sense. How's I not diagnosed, you know? Yeah, to be honest, all of these, sadness, depression, yeah, all of these I've felt. Definitely confusion, yeah, 100%. Yeah, that confusion definitely came flooding in. Yeah, I definitely felt all of these, and sometimes I still do feel some of them, even though it was like 5-6 years ago. But my initial reaction was this. I literally walked out of that office and I was like, I don't know what he is talking about. How can I have ADHD? You know, like, surely someone would have picked this up earlier. And I just did not engage at all. So I was really avoidant. I missed a lot of appointments. I kept cancelling appointments. In the end, they actually discharged me because, yeah, I was just so unengaged. Because I just found it too difficult. It was just too overwhelming, this idea that I had this condition and I've been living with it my whole life. So yeah, I was definitely in denial, but that's okay because everyone goes through different stages. It's just about how you work through it. But luckily, I was with somebody at the time who was really, really supportive, and they were very pro Googling everything and trying to understand things. So they went on this quest of understanding what ADHD was. So, you know, they'd say, oh, you know, I've just read about rejection sensitivity dysphoria, where you might be super sensitive to criticism, or if you perceive criticism, maybe that's why you get upset when I ask you why you haven't washed the dishes. You know, little things like that. They would start noticing, you know, why I was acting in certain ways and linking it to ADHD. So that actually made me feel a lot more comfortable to explore it and to understand what it meant for me personally, rather than this idea of something that's far away. So yeah, in terms of the research, one of the main things that really helped me understand it was the idea of executive functioning, because they talk a lot about, you know, hyperactivity or being inattentive or both, but actually there's a huge impact on your executive functioning, which is something we take for granted. It's stuff that we use in our day-to-day life. So, you know, things like organization, being able to say, I'm going out today, so that means I need to have clean socks, clean knickers, a bra, a top, you know, am I going to wear earrings, where are my shoes, organizing your day so that you can, you know, do the things that you plan to do. All of that is actually something that doesn't come automatically. So learning that actually other people can just get up and go about their day. They don't need to plan out, you know, wear their socks, wear their shoes. Emotional control was a really big one. People would just say, I'm really sensitive, or I've got a really bad temper. But actually it was about the regulation of emotions, and how, you know, how closely our neurons are connected in terms of processing, okay, is this a big deal or a little deal? And everything just feels like a big deal. Flexibility of thinking, you know, if there's a plan and it's been changed, feeling like that's too overwhelming. And actually that's where the crossover between autism was, where I thought actually maybe I have autism because of that rigidity of thinking. Things like stress tolerance, you know, feeling burnt out a lot faster than everybody else. Task initiation, which some people might call procrastination, but it's the idea that a task, to start a task, feels so much more overwhelming. So, you know, having to learn, okay, maybe I need to break it down into smaller pieces. General time management, you know, a lot of people with ADHD might struggle with time, have a thing called time blindness, where our idea of time is different to everybody else. And general just working memory, genuinely forgetting, you know, I might put my phone down on the bus and then get off the bus and have no idea where it is for the next 24 hours. So yeah, learning about all these different components made it so much easier to understand myself. And it was really, you know, having someone supportive there to work through it. Just another way of understanding how ADHD might impact us, you know, psychologically, if I always use the example, if I've got 5 spaces in my brain for working memory, a neurotypical person who doesn't have ADHD might have 10 or 11. So in terms of how much I can actually hold in my mind, it can feel quite overwhelming quite quickly if I've only got 5 spaces and everybody else has 11. You know, and there's a light going off and blinking, you know, there's cars going past, there's a child who their mum is ignoring them, so I can just hear them repeating themselves. That's already taken up 3 gaps. So psychologically, it can feel quite overwhelming. Emotionally, this meme is great at describing how things feel sometimes. Sometimes you know something's wrong, but you can't necessarily name what it is, and it's only until things completely, you know, explode that you can deal with what's happening. So actually, the processing and understanding feelings can be difficult. And physically was a new one that I didn't realize until quite recently. You know, small things can really build up frustration. Sometimes I'm sitting there and I'm really frustrated. It's like, oh, actually, I need to go to the toilet, but I've just forgotten. I haven't realized that's what the problem is. Or, you know, there might be a very small sound that's very low, but it's repeating itself, and that's almost gnawing away. So these are all things just to give an idea of what someone with ADHD might be experiencing during the day. So, cute ADHD babes. So at the time, the person I was with was trying to find loads of support groups, and a lot of them weren't very diverse. I was always the youngest person there. So they were like, why don't you just make your own? So yeah, that's a good idea. So ADHD Babes was made, and it's been an amazing resource for me, even as the founder, to meet people who look like me, who have similar experiences, just so you don't feel so alone and so othered, and you know that, you know, you're not the only one going through this. So yeah, it's been a great experience with them. Just a quick intro into neurodiversity before we go on to kind of educational aspect of it. So when we talk about neurodiversity, we're talking about the range of difference in a person's brain neurology, or, you know, the way their brain works. So that includes how it functions, how it processes information, and how that impacts our behavior. And I like the term neurodiversity because it doesn't other people. It talks about difference rather than, you know, you're normal and you're not. And it kind of implies that there's a variation of how human brains are, and just some people are one way and some people are others. Other examples of neurodiverse conditions are things like dyspraxia, or DCD, dyslexia, obviously ADHD, dyscalculia, which is, some people don't know about it, but it's how people process numbers and also shapes sometimes, autism and Tourette syndrome, and there's a few others that are on there as well, but these are some of the few that come up quite a lot. So in terms of contributing factors, it's definitely a genetic condition. You know, I think my dad has it, even though he's undiagnosed. Sometimes trauma at birth, immune disorders, nutritional factors, physical trauma, infectious diseases. And in terms of comorbidity, approximately 1 in 2 people with ADHD have dyslexia. That's me, I also have dyslexia. 1 in 2 people with ADHD have dyspraxia. Also me, I've got dyspraxia too. Studies have found that 9 in 10 people with Tourette's also have ADHD, which I think is a huge number, but not spoken about enough. 2 in 3 people with ADHD have ASD as well. So we've got a lot of people in the group who have both conditions, and people with ADHD are 8 times more likely to meet the criteria for ASD. There's also a misdiagnosis, often with other conditions such as bipolar disorder, anxiety, depression, emotionally unstable personality disorder. Sometimes actually people have both, but if somebody is constantly, you know, going between moods where they feel extremely excited and happy when things are well, really down, really low when things are bad, someone might say, okay, that's actually bipolar disorder, but actually it might be ADHD where they're struggling with the regulation and they're just having a lot of life stresses. So yeah, sometimes it's misdiagnosed, or sometimes it's missed because someone's given one diagnosis. So these are all things to kind of think about as well. Just as a caveat, I like to say whenever I speak about ADHD or any neurodiversity, if you ever hear anyone say about it being cured, it cannot be cured. It's not an illness, it's a brain difference, and it's biological. And we prescribe to the social model of disability. So, you know, we see it as where people are different, and society needs to create spaces and accommodations so that they can use their difference to the best of their ability, rather than kind of saying, you know, someone's disabled, therefore, you know, it's their fault, or they're unable to access things. It's like, actually, it is inaccessible, rather than placing the problem in them. It's kind of placing the problem in society's lack of accommodations. So yeah, in saying that, we kind of look at the positive sides of some of these diagnoses. So with ADHD, I definitely feel like it adds to my creativity. It definitely gives me, you know, unwarranted amount of energy. And yeah, with the dyspraxia, I definitely feel very empathetic, and dyslexia, you know, creative thinking. I definitely feel like I've got these things from the condition. Yeah. So in terms of intersectionality of ADHD, 25% of the prison population are thought to have ADHD, and you're more likely to have an addiction to a substance, more likely to die of an accident, and there's higher rates of suicide. So if you kind of imagine the amount of people who might go through the pipeline of education into prison, who actually have undiagnosed ADHD and weren't given the right support within the education system to actually find what they're good at. Yeah, it's just something to think about. 1.5 million adults in the UK have ADHD, but 120,000 are formally diagnosed. ADHD services are drastically underfunded, so it ends up being a kind of battle for people to get through the door of the NHS. And even when they do, you know, some people are waiting on 2-year-long waiting lists where they're trying to juggle, you know, all these symptoms, all these experiences without understanding what it actually means. When you look at women are more likely to be diagnosed with the inattentive type, and often later on in life. So 4.9% of women are diagnosed in their lifetime, compared to 12.9% of men. There's no indication within research to suggest that ADHD is a gender-specific condition, but in terms of the presentation of inattentive, women might be seen as, oh, she's a bit ditzy, oh, you know, she's just got her head in the clouds, oh, she just doesn't concentrate. Whereas if someone's got hyperactive symptoms, people might more visibly notice, oh, that boy keeps running around, oh, that boy can't sit still, maybe it's ADHD. And that's where this kind of false narrative that ADHD is just a little boy who can't sit still in class has come from. And then also the misdiagnosis with depression, anxiety, or bipolar disorder means that women will be, you know, if the emotional instability is the forefront of how they come to services, that's the focus. So, okay, it's bipolar disorder, put them on a mood stabilizer, but that doesn't help them sustain their concentration. It doesn't explain why, you know, they can't finish a project, they start a project and they move on to something else. So it only helps with half of the problem. Yeah, so again, back to this myth of what ADHD actually looks like. Then you look at the Black community. There's limited knowledge of what ADHD looks like within the Black community. When you look at a lot of studies who explore ADHD, the actual participants are often white males. So, you know, white women also aren't considered in this, but even more so, any Black people are not considered in what this actually looks like. And also how medication impacts you, but that's another story. The fact that it's a genetic condition means that if, you know, my parent had it, which I believe my dad had it, if there's no knowledge of what that means, he's just had to kind of go through life with these experiences and get on with it. So rather than look for the idea that, oh, I have this condition, so if my child acts like this, maybe they also have it, they'll just see it as, oh, maybe they've just picked up this trait from me. So it's not seen as a concern, it's just seen as something that's part of the family. It's just, you know, the way we are. There's also, in some of our community, a culture of not washing your dirty laundry outside. So that may impact help seeking. So, you know, my child's struggling to concentrate in school, rather than kind of going to the school and bringing this up, which is often difficult anyway, because Black parents might be seen as, oh, you know, they're being the angry Black woman, or, you know, they're pushing back, they're making extra complaints. But it might mean that people just keep the problem inside the household and try and manage it the best they can, rather than seeking support. There's also a pre-existing strained relationship with all types of mental health services due to, you know, mistreatment, systematic racism. You know, the way people are seen and perceived in services may have a huge impact on how much we want to reach out or feel safe enough to reach out. There was a great paper done by Keating where they spoke about the cycle of fear, where they were saying, you know, services sometimes perceive people from the Black community as dangerous and treat them in a certain way. And then the Black community feel like, oh, I'm being seen as a threat. And then they also want to, you know, retract themselves and create distance. So that kind of feeds into an ongoing cycle, as well as the fact that people from the Black community have less access to talking therapy and are often given higher dosages within mental health institutions. So all these things kind of play into the safety that people might feel in terms of reaching out. Yeah. And then you look at Black women specifically. Official figures showed in 2014 that Black women actually made up the highest percentage of people who screened positive for ADHD. However, in terms of actually being diagnosed, there seems to be a gap where it's like, you know, we've noticed there's something, but the follow-up help isn't given. So it's almost as if, you know, along the pipeline, for some reason, we're falling through. The racial medical gap was coined, you know, as a term to explain this thing where our needs are identified, but for some reason they're not actually being supported. And then you also have the cultural pressure in a lot of communities as a Black woman to, you know, have your stuff together, to be able to, you know, handle a household, to look after yourself and look after the people around you. So there's a lot of different things to juggle mentally. Cool, so now how do these intersect within education? So the severity of ADHD symptoms has been found to predict how well you perform within education, and that's for a multitude of reasons. So things like, you know, memory, how you're able to reason, academic skills, and then just general cognitive ability has been seen to be impacted, you know, if you have ADHD. So if these things are impacted, that can obviously have an impact on how you're performing within education without the right support. They found that it can have an impact on your pre-reading skills and math skills. It can impact your general reading achievement, so how able you're able to read, more likely to use kind of remedial academic services, and often people with ADHD are placed in special educational classes, SEN classes, or given SEN support during the year. And often people with ADHD are seen to repeat a year or to completely drop out. So there's a lot of, you know, difficult statistics when people do have an ADHD diagnosis. Within university, they found that people with ADHD had a lower grade average. They're more likely to be put on some sort of probation. And they also struggled with the kind of necessary tasks that you need for university. So things like having any kind of study strategy, taking notes, summarizing, taking tests, managing your time, general concentration, and also retaining information. You know, when I look at the list, I think back to my years in uni, I didn't even have a study strategy until I got a specialist tutor. So some of the very basic things that we need to get through university are naturally going to be difficult because of, you know, the executive functioning difficulties. So these are all things that can get in the way of how well we achieve. So it's not to say the person's not intelligent or they have a low IQ or they're not capable, but it's the processes in between that get you to, okay, this is the question in the essay. How do I write out this essay? How do I plan it? How do I summarize the lecture into a way that's, you know, manageable and digestible? So it's the step from A to B is where we get missed. And then when you have a combination of other conditions, you know, like we saw the 1 in 2s for dyslexia, 1 in 2 for dyspraxia, you're managing the sustained concentration, you know, the forward thinking, the planning, but then you're also struggling to process phonetics, also struggling to, you know, order the work that you're trying to do. So yeah, there's a lot of things to juggle in there. And then being Black within the education system. So Black children are amongst other minority groups with the lowest education attainment. So, you know, we use the term BME sometimes, but yeah, Black children were within that group who achieve the lowest educational attainment. Black Caribbean and mixed white with Black Caribbean children had the highest rates of permanent exclusion, which is 3 times more than all other pupils. And only 6% of Black school leavers attended a Russell Group university in comparison to 12% people who are mixed or Asian school leavers who were 11% of white school leavers. African Caribbean and Black pupils were less likely to achieve 5 GCSEs in comparison to their white pupils. So yeah, it kind of goes along the education system either being excluded or not achieving as much as other pupils. Black children who are on free school meals fell further below the national average. So then again, there's that intersectionality of you know, income, how much money comes into your household, how much is accessible to you. And they also found that when people did get into these spaces, into, you know, education, further education, they felt like they had to face all these systematic barriers. So it's not like some people got through and it was okay for them. It's like some people get through despite all the difficulties. People spoke about a lack of Black teachers, a lack of role models, and also being labelled troublemakers, low achievers. So again, this perception, the way people are being seen and treated because of, you know, a label, because of the way they look, is now again another barrier. So then you think about, okay, if this is what Black men are going through, and also, you know, Black students in general, how are Black women and marginalised genders also being treated? So, you know, if we think back to the list of difficulties that women with ADHD might go through, Black folk with ADHD might go through in general, your ADHD is being missed, you're being misunderstood because you're a woman with ADHD. So, you know, maybe she's not paying attention, she's not committed, she's not serious. And then generally within the education system, as a Black person, you might be going through difficulties with your income in the family, or, you know, you've only achieved 5 GCSEs or even less, or you're being seen as a troublemaker, so you've been permanently excluded. And then again, the pressure as a Black woman, but actually you need to be put together. You can't be the one who gets excluded, or you can't only get 5 GCSEs, you need to achieve. And then you've got the stigma. Again, if Black men are being perceived as dangerous, Black women are being perceived as, you know, the angry Black woman. If you kind of speak up or stand up for yourself, you're seen as aggressive. Or even if you are doing something that can be perceived as aggressive, it might be blown out of proportion because you're Black. So there's so many different things to juggle, you know, the education side of it, the fact that you're a woman, so the gender side of it, the fact that you're Black, you know, all of these things, plus the fact that you're experiencing symptoms of ADHD and you don't understand that's what it is. So, you know, all these things are going to be internalized. So what this might look like from the outside, you know, from a teacher or from a lecturer or from friends looking in, someone who's, oh, you're not committed, you're not serious, you don't really care about this course. Well, they obviously do, because they've done their UCAS, you know, they filled out that long, boring form to get on. So they obviously do care, but they might appear like they're uninterested. They might appear very unorganized, very forgetful. I definitely missed a lot of lectures, a lot of seminars, just because I genuinely didn't remember and I didn't have the resources to have a really clear routine. Missing a lot of deadlines, or completely forgetting about deadlines, lectures, seminars, leaving lectures early or attending late. That might be about the kind of struggling to sit still, the kind of inner restlessness, appearing very unfocused in lecture, difficulty sustaining attention, having really good content in submission, but having a really poor layout and structure, or really common grammatical mistakes, spelling mistakes, having to retake modules or having to retake the whole year. And often people drop out. I know a lot of people in the group who dropped out right up to their final year because they just couldn't manage without the support. And also there's a complete opposite side, where there's some people who get through the education system with undiagnosed ADHD or other conditions, and they mask. So if you actually go and, you know, ask them how they process their day, they're always early because they've been up since 5 a.m. making sure they're not late, because they've gone through their life always being late, always forgetting. So they're excessively organized, excessively, you know, committed to doing things out of the fear of making mistakes, which also is not healthy. You know, it's productive because you pass all your tests and you pass university, but in terms of the impact on you, it's really difficult. So also, you know, that's another way. Just because someone has passed and has done things really well on the outside, it doesn't actually mean they're suffering. They're not suffering on the inside. So it's also good to check in with people, how much effort it takes to do the things they're doing. Cool. On the inside, what it might feel like is feeling like a failure, feeling unable to manage independent learning, planning, prioritizing. I definitely felt the shift when I got to college, that actually you have to do things on your own, and that felt a lot harder. People might feel isolated because they might say, oh, I can't concentrate. Someone will say, you know, just go to the library. People don't understand that starting a task is so difficult. It might lead to mental health difficulties and low self-esteem. You know, internalizing the fact you can't do these things like everybody else can lead to depression, anxiety, perfectionist traits that are sometimes associated with OCD. So it's just, I put the intersectionality diagram here, the Crenshaw approach to intersectionality, and it's just things to consider. You know, if someone is Black, say a Black British person, Black British woman, comes from a working class, maybe English isn't their first language, might be from marginalized religion, so maybe, you know, she's a Muslim woman, she's struggling now with low self-esteem, she's trying to get through the education system, but because of this undiagnosed ADHD, you know, she's struggling, and she's also holding all these other things in mind. It's just a lot of things to juggle. So sometimes we just see the person, you know, doing this, and we think, oh, they're just not serious. But that's why it's really important to ask questions and to always kind of give people grace before we make a final assumption. So yeah, the question is kind of, now what? We come to the end. There's a lot of stuff to think about. But what I always think is, you know, if there's a difficulty, there's always a solution. So educational adaptations and inclusive support is really important. All students with a disability are eligible for DSA if they have right to public funds, which looks like extra time, extended deadlines, getting specialist tutors and specialist equipment and programs for laptops, ADHD coaches, therapy and counselling, which can really work through the kind of mental difficulties, general mentoring, just so they can see someone, you know, who's similar to them, who's, you know, done similar things, simple things like body doubling, having someone else there to work through, and other ADHD hacks, you know, such as habit checkers, time blocking, the Pomodoro technique. These are all ways that we can support people, and there's loads. So as a closing points, if anybody in the chat relates to some of this stuff, I would say go and seek support. You know, have a chat with your GP, have a look at some of the ADHD websites on their kind of lists of understanding ADHD. Try and be inclusive of difference and personalize people's support. So, you know, if you notice some of these things, you notice someone struggling, you know, try and bring that compassion in, you know, rather than assuming. And it is frustrating because if you're on the other side of it, it's like, you know, why is this person doing it? But genuinely ask that why. Try and, you know, hold space for that person to find out what's going on, because you never know how much you can support someone just by getting to the root of the problem. Where you can, advocate for inclusive spaces, inclusive services, and where you can, support neurodiverse organisations and groups, try and get their opinions on things, try and bring them in. Yeah, I don't know what time it is because I have poor sense of time, but thank you for listening and being my friend for the last however many minutes it's been. If you wanted to ask any more questions beyond this session, feel free to drop me an email, or, you know, you can follow us on socials and drop me a message. But yeah, that's all from me today.
Thank you so much. That was really thought-provoking. That made me question like a lot of things as well, and I related to a lot of it. So thank you. We have questions coming through. So we've got someone you can see as well. Yes. I'll read it aloud too. So, hi Vivienne, your talk is so comforting, thank you. Would you have any advice for non-white, older international uni students on how to get help in the medical system? It can get really lonely being a non-traditional, especially if one is introverted and having several conditions related to ADHD.
Okay. Oh, thank you for that question. Yeah, trying to have a think. Well, firstly, sorry that it feels lonely, because yeah, it's never nice to feel on your own with these types of things. Yeah, so firstly, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm really glad it was comforting as well. I would say if you are in university, the first step is to go to your disabled student support team, because they can, if you go to them and explain that I'm having these difficulties, and I've been reading up on whichever condition you most relate to, whether it's ADHD or a multitude of things, they can refer you on for a specialist assessment with an educational psychologist. So that's a good start to kind of get that diagnosis, have the assessment, and then you can get your adjustments within the education system. So yeah, I would say they should be on the uni website. If you just type in disability, student support, anything along those lines. Make sure you kind of write out the things you've been struggling with, because sometimes they're a bit resistant, especially when resources are tight. So you really have to argue your case. So yeah, I would say start there, just so within the education system you get the support that you need. And then transferring that onto the medical side, it's sometimes easier when you get the educational diagnosis to then advocate to your GP, because you can kind of say, well, I've been seen by a professional, but it just doesn't translate into the medical field straight away. But regardless, you can use the same process of getting the list of things you're experiencing, so you can really back yourself up, and then go to your GP and really express how difficult it is and how it's impacting your day-to-day. In terms of feeling alone and introverted, I would always suggest finding some kind of support group online. You know, if you're Black, feel free to come to ADHD Babes if you're Black woman or non-binary. If not, still just shoot me an email, and there's a list of online communities that I've got for people who aren't within our criteria that you can check out. And some of them you don't have to have your camera on. Some of them, you know, you can just listen and know that you're not alone, that there's other people going through similar things. And maybe when you do feel more comfortable, you can do meetups and reach out to people more. But yeah, I think it can be really hard. But a lot of people are living with their ADHD and not taking, you know, Western medication. They've found like non-traditional ways of managing. Like at the moment, I'm on unmedicated. So there are ways of managing. It's not very easy all the time, but yeah, you do have a tribe out there. There is always people out there, but it's just finding them. That's the hard part. So I would really encourage you to try and find them that way. Yeah, I hope that helps. Oh, I'm glad. Thank you. I wish you the best as well. Good luck on the course as well.
Hi Vivian, would you mind popping your personal email address in there as well, because I can't seem to find it.
Of course, I'll do that now.
Thank you. Yeah, if anyone else has any comments or questions. Oh, thank you. Oh, we have one. Wondering if you have suggestions for youth facilitators to prioritise accessibility with online platforms like Zoom, like any specific techniques that you have?
Yeah, so yeah, there's such a variation. So I think like the live transcripts is definitely a start for people. Recording sessions and then sending them out. Yeah, yeah, it's cool. I'll write as much as I can. Yeah, so recording sessions and making it available to attendees so that they can listen in their own time and break it down and kind of pause and go back to it. That's depending on what the content of the session is anyway, that's another option. In terms of, so what we've done is we plan sessions in bites. So we've got, we have the agenda, like 20 minutes for this, 40 minutes for this, blah, blah, blah. And we've made it so the beginning is quite open, so people can kind of bring their own stuff. So how do I say? So it's structured, but it's semi-structured. So rather than like everything is to a T, there's literally a part where it can just be very fluid. So that way people don't feel too constrained. People can be random, can, you know, go on tangents, and they're allowed to do that. But then in the second half of the session, it's a lot more structured. It's like, we're talking about this specific topic for this amount of time. So if that feels too overwhelming, then, you know, people have already had the part of the beginning where they can be free and be flexible. We're also like really open to ideas. So, well, you know, when we get to the middle, we'll kind of do a poll. How long do we want the break for? Do we want more than one break? So constantly kind of asking people for their feedback in terms of what's going to make the session most engaging for them. Doing that at the start, doing it at the end, doing it in the middle, and then also beforehand kind of asking people, okay, how are we, you know, how would we want this session to be? Are there any suggestions? So we constantly have a suggestion poll that we send out to people after every session. So if they want to add on new ideas. So over time, the session is just filled with people's suggestions to make it more accessible, more inclusive. Other than that, I'm not too sure. I hope that was helpful. Yeah, cool. Alrighty.
There's more of a comment than a question. Oh, there is. I'll read out the comment first, and then I'll read out the question, because I think it's only sent to the both of us, isn't it? So, so someone has said, "Thank you for the talk. I was on a waiting list for 3 years for a diagnosis before being told they wouldn't accept me since I didn't have my school records. I'm 31. I was quite heartbroken. A friend pointed out the NHS does have the right to choose programme and have found places that don't require school records." So I'll also pop that in the chat. I'm unsure on the right to choose programme in Scotland. I know that is the case in Wales and in England and probably Northern Ireland, but I am unsure. But I'll pop it in the chat anyway.
Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. That's really hard. Because 3 years is a really long time, and I know typically, like in London, it's about 2 years now. So I can't even imagine having to wait 3 years and to have that snag of just not having school records. It sounds really, really difficult. But even if it's not Psychiatry UK, there are definitely private places that offer diagnosis. It's just the difficulty is getting the care sent back to the NHS once you get the diagnosis. Yeah, so I really hope that the right to choose does work for you. But if not, there are other places, and some places actually do the assessment online. So even if it's it's not in your local area, you can do it online. Yeah, so I hope that does get sorted for you.
Yeah, me too. I have a question from Mary Cruz. What was your process to practicing in giving presentations such as this one? It is admiring.
I'm still on mute. Thank you. Did you say what was the process?
Yeah, what is your process to practicing and giving presentations such as this one?
I don't think anyone's asked me that before. How do I practice giving presentations? So, well, how do I make it? So I guess I start with basic intro. This is me. And then my main thing is kind of having the main points that I want to hit. So for example, with this one, the points that I want to hit is this is me and this is how I got into ADHD, or this is how I learned about ADHD. This is how ADHD might be felt by people. These are some typical experiences. This is neurodiversity. This is the intersection of ADHD and gender and race in education. What are we going to do about it? So I guess I have my main points, and then as I'm making the slides, I kind of have my resources and my studies, and this is the main point I want to hit, and that will be under each heading. So I think the actual process of making the presentation is the practice for me, because the main thing is I know what I'm trying to say, like my point is X. Yeah, so the creation of it, getting my facts behind each point, and then I really like pictures because I don't know, it makes things a bit more digestible. So even like the process of getting the pictures, I have to think about what's the point I'm trying to make and what picture kind of depicts that. So by the time I've now got to the end of the presentation, I know exactly what I'm trying to say for each point. So I kind of just share it. Like I know the point I make means something to me, so it's easier to kind of say. But I kind of think I cheat a little bit because I do performing arts, so we use we learn a lot of techniques in performing arts in terms of like how to deliver things and how to project your voice and pronunciate and all that jazz. So maybe I'm cheating a little bit because I'm using a bit of that. So yeah, I would say when you're making your presentation, each focus should be on what point you're trying to make and how, and that can help. And also maybe do performing arts. Yeah,
that's good hack. going to Amdram, basically. There was just a comment from Dustin saying, I moved from England to Scotland and the process had to restart. It's very worth regularly chasing up your GP and the referral once you've put all the documentation together, which could include getting statements from colleagues / co-workers, etc. So that was in relation to the last comment.
Yeah, so it's really difficult. It's really, really inaccessible, actually, the whole process. Sometimes we laugh about it in the group. We're like, we think we have ADHD and you're giving us this big list of things to read through and answer. It's like it's the most anti-ADHD thing I can imagine, and trying to understand who we are. Yeah, the process is really, really difficult, and it's really hard because I actually work for the NHS, so I see the flip side where they're like inundated with referrals and they have like no staff, and they see the waiting list growing and growing. So part of them is actually trying to keep people away because they know they don't have any resources, but that's not the people's fault. That's a funding difficulty. So yeah, it's really, really hard. Yeah, so I think definitely staying on the GP's case, because even then they've got so much to juggle. So it's like you just really have to advocate for yourself, which isn't easy because you're trying to juggle ADHD in itself. Yeah, so it's not easy. Yeah.
I do know that with I think Psychiatry UK, you can just pay. It says you can pay privately, but obviously you are still going to be on some sort of waiting list. But at least it's like connected to the NHS, isn't it? I know that just from my own process in Scotland going through it. So it might be worth doing that. And it's just clicked with me now what the right to choose, and it's definitely not in Scotland. So it is only in Wales and England. So it might be worth just, I know it's not ideal, but perhaps paying to get a diagnosis. But obviously, if you don't have the funds, maybe getting support elsewhere for the time being, like resources and things until.
Yeah, and the support. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to take over then.
No, it's a good point. No. Yeah, no, it's a really good point. I know some do payment plans and things like that as well. So that's also an option. But yeah, it's not an easy journey. But yeah, in our group we actually allow people to come even if they don't have a clinical diagnosis, because of all these barriers and because of all the difficulties. And actually, if you're struggling with the things that we're talking about, then you're going to benefit from talking about that anyway, even if you have the diagnosis or not. So yeah, sometimes in that process, focusing on, okay, what do I need, regardless of whether my diagnosis is ADHD, I need support with X and Y. So where is that support? That can help in the interim as well.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, I think we have another question. Yep. Thank you for sharing your experience, Vivian. Since your diagnosis, how have things changed for you? I relate to the feeling of excessive stimulation around other people's sounds, etc., but wondered how a diagnosis can help change things.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. So I would say the diagnosis doesn't change, hasn't and won't change me per se. What it does is it offers you a different lens in understanding yourself, and in doing that, it gives you the space and room to figure out how to accommodate yourself in different spaces. So before, as I was learning that, oh, okay, I might be experiencing sensory overload. Now that I know that that's a thing, when I find myself frustrated and I'm trying to figure out what that means, I will start looking, I'll go through my mental list of, okay, is it really noisy right now? Or, I've practiced a lot of mindfulness, since getting the diagnosis. So that helps as like the kind of pillar of figuring out what's happening for me. Okay, what's going on? It's really loud, I haven't eaten, and you only slept for 4 hours. So now I know, because I've got ADHD, my sensory intake can be overloaded. So I need to put my noise cancelling headphones on, for example. So it's more about how you see the world and how you relate to it rather than it changing you. It almost just shifts your trajectory a little bit. So in terms of how my life has changed, I've tried to accommodate my life and my difference in nearly everything I do. So, you know, I was very forgetful. You know, I would forget literally everything. Like I found a diary from 2013 today where I had to like write my niece's birthdays on so many pages so I wouldn't forget. So now to help myself from forgetting, I've got my phone, everything is in my phone, all my birthday reminders, you know, the time I was supposed to go to the bank, everything is in there. In terms of, you know, so for example, body doubling, I know I find it hard to concentrate on boring tasks. So I will ask friends to stay on Zoom with me so that I don't get distracted. You know, I make sure I meditate every day. I book in once a week to go in nature with no phone. So it's more about allowing yourself to accept that I need extra help and to almost just not demonize yourself for that. It's like, it is what it is. I can't, you know, do things back to back and feel okay. I need a half an hour gap, or I'm going to feel overwhelmed. I'm going to get snappy. I'm going to get really frustrated. I know that if I go out tomorrow, the next day for the, you know, at least till 2 p.m, I'm going to feel quite flat out because I've taken in too much sensory stuff. So it doesn't mean I can't go out, but it means I don't book anything for the next day up until a certain point. So yeah, I think it really just allows me to be more compassionate with myself. You know, when I get 2 parking tickets a month, rather than getting super angry at myself and beating myself up, I'm like, oh, it's ADHD tax. I forgot, and now I've got a £130 fine. Yeah, so I think it just gives you a lot more space to think and to be compassionate and to put accommodations for yourself and to also request those accommodations from other people, whether it's with resources or equipment or just them being a bit more patient with you or sending you a reminder so you don't have to remind yourself. Yeah, so that's how it's been for me.
Thank you for that. I'm going to use that ADHD tax from now on. That's a good way of thinking.
Honestly, put it on the ADHD tax. We all get taxed at some point, so it's just a different tax.
And then just Fred agreeing with you, saying, yeah, you know, it is hard, how hard it can be to get an ADHD diagnosis as an adult. It doesn't make sense to me to exclude undiagnosed folks.
Yeah, definitely. Because for me, it's about the need. And someone said it in the group before. It was like, regardless of whether you tell someone it's because I have ADHD, if you are expressing, I need you to, you know, please just give me a reminder the day before, that's going to be really helpful for me. Or, you know, if the room is really loud, just give me 5 minutes, I just need to step out. It's just you expressing a need, and people who care and are compassionate, they're going to make space for you where reasonable, where they have capacity. So, you know, even if someone's undiagnosed, if they need something, if there's a gap there, trying to find that gap is where the kind of care and support comes to it.
So we have another question, maybe last question. How do you find the medications, whether from experience or what you know of
them? So I tried medication, but I was actually quite adamant that I wanted talking therapies. I'm a bit of a hippie sometimes. And they actually, I tried loads because I got loads of side effects. And one of them actually worked for me. Sorry, I'm just putting my thing on charge before it dies. 1 sec. Cool. So one of them actually worked, but the dose was too high. So it stopped my racing thoughts, but then it slowed me way too down. So I was just very zoned out. And because I kept missing appointments and then got discharged, I didn't get to find the right dose for me. So I would like to try it again, just for those days when I need to focus on admin and find it really hard. But I'm back on the waiting list, and that's probably going to be, you know, another year or so. But for some people, they find medication as a lifesaver. They say it gets them through the day, especially when they have jobs that are very, you know, I need to sit down and focus. Some people take the short release one where they just take it when they need to do a task. Some people take the one where it has to go through the whole day. So I would say every person is different. There's no wrong or right answer. But if people think it will be helpful, I would say go for it and just work with the consultant to find the type and the dose that's going to work for you. And it's just, again, it's another resource. I need to sustain concentration. Medication might help me do that. For other people, they do lots of exercise and they meditate. So it's just whatever's best for you, really.
We've just had a few people say goodbye and thank you for your talk in the chat as well. And then a couple of comments actually. First one, self-compassion feels like one of the hardest things to learn sometimes. Thank you for such an inspiring chat. Great presentation. And then another one saying, fighting against giving yourself accommodations took me a while to learn, and that's okay. Okay in capitals. It is a relief to start understanding that it's just good practice and helps you live better all around.
100%. It's about our quality of life, isn't it? We shouldn't have to, you know, why shouldn't we be given space to like live our most comfortable life where we're most fulfilled? Yeah, I think sometimes society can be a bit too harsh. We're always told to just get on with it, but actually why can't you just give me a little bit of help so that things are a bit easier? We don't always need to be struggling through things. And doesn't mean that everything should be easy all the time, but if an adjustment can make things easier for me and it genuinely will be helpful, you know, why not? And we do deserve it, you know. It's really important. That first belief of actually I deserve to get help, that is a really hard part. And once you get it, sometimes you just have to keep reminding yourself or get other people to remind you. And sometimes you have to say it even if you don't believe it, just because, you know, logically we know that we should get that support. And over time, the more you get it and the more you get validated while doing it, it just becomes second nature. Yeah, so it's a process, but it's definitely possible. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll take any last questions or comments now, but if not, we'll probably clock off at time now. 5 past, is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's good. I just saw Fred said, find it hard to ask for help. Yeah, so do I. Honestly, to this day, sometimes people have to kind of, I'll be going through stuff and it will take someone else asking me, what can I help you with? So even that, if you find it hard to ask for help, the people around you who you trust, if you do trust them and they're really supportive, agreeing on a contract where it's like, you know what, once a month or once a week, could you ask me if I need any help? Because I actually struggle to ask for help, or have a phrase or a question that can trigger that thought of, oh, okay, do I need help right now? How can I ask for it safely? So where possible, externalize the things that you find difficult. But I think, yeah, having that reminder, whether it's a thought or something you've written down, that you deserve to ask for help. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to get support. Just always go back to that point. And even if you don't feel like you do, just, you know, literally do the opposite where possible. Yeah.
Okay, so we have 1 minute left, just for anyone who wants to get to hear us. Yeah, so we have 1 minute left. If anyone wants to make any comments, you can unmute yourself or pop her in the chat too. But if not, I'm just going to preemptively say thank you so much for this talk. It was really good, really inspiring.
Thank you. No, thank you for having me. It's been really lovely. Thank you.